And welcome to your political pulse. He is running for the state of South Dakota's Senate seat that will be open next week, running as the independent candidate, Brian Bengs. Retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, you also taught the law of war at the NATO school and at the Air Force Academy. And I know you wanted to come on today and give us your concerns about the situation right now that's going on in Venezuela. So we'll just start there and get right into it. What are your concerns right now with this recent operation? We saw the arrest of Nicolas Maduro and his wife, both brought to New York to face charges.
Okay, well, there's a multitude of legal issues from international law, constitutional law. There's just a whole bunch of things. This is a multi-day class that could be run. But the bottom line is it was a violation of international law, and it was a violation of the constitutional authority to wage war of the United States Congress with the president acting alone. So there's two violations there. Fundamentally, as someone who's spent their entire life studying, practicing, and teaching the rule of law, basically, it was a blatant violation of the rule of law. That's
Let's begin with the international law. How did this break international law to your understanding?
Okay, well, we engaged in an armed attack upon a foreign state, and we stole their leader. We kidnapped him, essentially. So to have the authority to use force against another state, there has to be one of two things, essentially. It has to be permission from the UN Security Council, which we didn't have, or there has to be a defensive action, an armed attack, in response to an armed attack. So we were the aggressor here. Functionally, we're the same thing as Russia and Ukraine at this point. We are the aggressor to take action against Venezuela.
So you're saying because defensively, you wouldn't really have time to go to the UN Security Council, right? I mean, if you're being attacked, yes, you kind of have to act.
So those are the two parameters to engage in an armed conflict. We're at a state of war right now, by the way. So we have engaged in an armed attack upon a foreign nation. We've taken their leader. So the fact that Venezuela has not chosen to respond at this point does not change the fact that we are now in an international armed conflict.
So I want to go straight to this audio. Marco Rubio's pushed back on the idea that this needed congressional approval. He says this was not an invasion, not an extended operation. He's saying it was a precise operation. He said that the U.S. could not afford leaks. This might put people in danger. And he really described this as a law enforcement operation. I want to go to soundbite one. This is from Meet the Press Sunday.
Well, we will seek congressional approval for actions that require congressional approval. But otherwise, they will get congressional notification. And this is not an operation that required congressional approval. In fact, this is an operation akin to what virtually every single president for the last 40 years has conducted. The difference is that when it's Donald Trump, all these Democrats go bonkers.
Couple questions there. So we'll start with what he said at the end there. Have we seen similar actions with previous administrations, or any actions you've seen with previous administrations that have raised flags for you?
Yes, absolutely. No, this is a recurring problem. So to say that this is only a Donald Trump problem is incorrect. The War Powers Resolution from 1973, Congress at that point had a backbone that we haven't seen since, essentially. And they said, you know what? We have the war-making authority of the United States per the Constitution. You do not, President. So you have to go through us. And the failure since then on a multitude of times for a variety of presidents doing things, Obama did things, has been a problem. So Congress, by not enforcing its authority, has allowed this to fester, and this is just another example of it.
When you're looking at international law, or you're looking at getting war approval from Congress, how do you differentiate, though, from a law enforcement operation? I mean, essentially, Maduro did have charges against him.
Have we attacked and killed people? Did you kill people and break things when you did this in a foreign country? Now, imagine if Donald Trump was in San Francisco. Let's say he was doing something there, and China or Russia, or pick your country, came in and said, they blew up some stuff and killed 80 people is the last I'd heard in Venezuela. And they grabbed Donald Trump and said, oh, we got him. He was not the legitimate president. So have they committed an armed attack against the United States? The factual definition is yes. Most countries do not like that.
So let's go back to the congressional side of this, though. So we're talking about the international side of this. And we'll get into maybe the potential fallout that you see happening from this. But on the congressional side, you believe that this needed approval by Congress?
Yes. We attacked a foreign country. Again, as I said, we are in a state of armed conflict with Venezuela now. The fact that they are weaker than us is the only thing preventing, the repercussions. And the repercussions, we've been talking about, or the president's been talking about, we're going to run Venezuela. So he's talking like a military occupier, and that we're going to get their oil industry. I've already talked to the oil companies, come in and grab their oil and everything. So what happens next, if everybody thinks back to the occupation of Iraq, that went south. We've killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians died in that. So the ability to decide how this is going to go is now in the hands of the Venezuelans. And the president's not been shy saying, we may have boots on the ground there. We may occupy this country. That needs congressional authority. It didn't happen, obviously, so that horse is out the gate, but it still needs some Congress taking action to say, yeah, it's okay for you to send Americans to die in Venezuela, for you to spend the billions, if not trillions of dollars to occupy a foreign country. Not to mention the fact that now we're talking about Cuba, Colombia, Greenland. We're going to get Greenland sometime now. Do you think Congress should step up? Congress is full of cowards. They're not doing their job.
So I want to get into that part of this whole thing as well. So you talk about he did not seek congressional approval, but right now Congress, if you look at the House and you look at the Senate, is majority Republican.
Yes.
And so they would really have the power to at least take a majority and at least maybe censuring the operation in Venezuela. They have yet to do that. Does that grant the president any, I don't want to use the word immunity, but any almost in a quasi way approval by Congress?
A tacit approval, yeah. That Mike Rounds, for example, Mike Rounds owns this. He is a supporter for Venezuela. He's not spoken up. John Thune, I think, has spoken up. I've not heard too many people speaking up that are in the majority party. And the system, again, is not supposed to work this way. The fact that it's worked this way for as long as it has, where Congress just goes, well, it's our guy that directed this illegal activity, so it's cool. It can't work that way. It should be a balls and strike. It's either bad or it's good. And you can't say, well, it's the other guy that's doing it, and it's not my party, so now it's bad. But if it's my guy doing it, that's cool. That cannot work.
So you taught the law of war at the NATO school. How do you see what do you see the international fallout from this being?
We already seen this. A number of foreign European, our allies, our NATO allies, leaders have put out a statement saying, hey, Greenland is an ally. Denmark is a NATO ally. Denmark was one of the founding members of NATO in 1949. You shouldn't be talking about taking property with force potentially from an ally. Other countries now are now looking at the United States as a potential threat. And this is fundamentally a change in accord with the national security strategy that the Trump administration put out last month, where it talked about the U.S. is not going to be a global power anymore. It's just going to be a regional power, hemispherical power. So we are essentially renouncing a global role that we'd had since the end of World War II now.
So the U.S. has laid out its case against Maduro. I want to get into the actual allegations here, saying he was working with cartels to allow for the shipment of tons of cocaine into the U.S. The AP reported successive U.S. administrations have warned about Venezuela's role as a transit point for cocaine and a haven for criminal gangs, terrorist groups, and drug smuggling leftist rebels from neighboring Colombia. This is, again, reporting coming from the AP. Yeah. We heard Marco Rubio talking a little bit about the fact that this has also been a haven for some of these groups like Iran and Hezbollah. Could there be an argument that this was a legitimate national security operation?
Well, let me preface this by saying that Maduro was an illegitimate leader, authoritarian. He's a bad guy. Should he be in power? Absolutely not. But do the ends justify the means? When we're grabbing somebody to bring them back to the United States to face legal sanction or legal repercussions here, is it good that we violated basically every international law to do that? Is that cool? Like, hey, we're going to hold you to account for the law. Ignore the fact that we got you this way. So is it good that this happened? Well, the end potentially could be good. We don't know what the end is yet, though, because it's still so fresh. And again, this is all up to the Venezuelans. What's the end going to be? We don't know.
You are making the point that we've heard from the U.S. side what the U.S. side wants to see, but as you mentioned, there is no control ultimately by the U.S. of what Venezuela could do in response to this.
Yes.
So let's go into these next steps. We got a little bit of a look at this over the weekend as Secretary of State Marco Rubio went on and did these Sunday shows. And one of the things he talked about was using an oil quarantine for the U.S. to make its demands. It seems like, from what the administration is saying right now, that they are giving the leader who took over, Dircy Rodriguez, they are giving her an opportunity to meet the U.S.'s demands. We'll go to Rubio on ABC, and then we will come back to you.
Okay.
George, I've explained again that the leverage that we have here is the leverage of the quarantine. So that is a Department of War operation, conducting, in some cases, law enforcement functions with the Coast Guard on the seizure of these boats. I'm obviously very intricately involved in these policies. And by the way, very intricately involved in moving forward. And what we hope to see some of these changes being addressed. Unfortunately, the person that was there before, who was not the legitimate president of the country, was someone we could not work with. Was someone that we could not. He had already suckered the Biden administration a couple of years ago on a deal he didn't keep. And this is someone we simply couldn't work with. We are hopeful that there are people in place now. We're going to find out. The proof will be in what they do or fail to do, that will start making some of these changes that will ultimately lead to a Venezuela that looks substantially and dramatically different from what's been in place for 15 years. But our number one objective is America. We care about Venezuela. We want it to do well moving forward. But our number one objective here is America. No more drugs, no more Tren-de-Agua gangs coming our direction, and no more an area of the country in our hemisphere that becomes a crossroads for every single adversary we have around the world. Hezbollah, Iran, all of them have turned it into their playground. That can't and will not continue under this administration.
So just getting into this, this oil quarantine, how do you see this playing out?
Well, obviously, it would be a naval blockade, apparently. So does the U.S. have the capacity to do it? Yeah, absolutely. Would it be effective? Absolutely. Is it lawful? Well, we're in a state of armed conflict now, I guess. So yes, in a war, a naval blockade is lawful and the common practice. Again, Venezuelans could be killing Americans if they choose, because we are in a state of armed conflict.
Couple questions there, and you heard him saying that there. He says the country was a crossroads for Iran, for Hezbollah, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. How much of a threat do you think that was to the United States?
Well, they were not here, so Iran, Hezbollah, they're planning things. Again, they're malicious actors, obviously. So they're planning things from a variety of places. The fact that they were in Venezuela, I don't see how that directly harms us. The smuggling operations, the cartels, I would note that the Department of Justice, the Department of State, a few months ago, earlier this summer, talked about the cartel of the Suns. And the Department of Justice, now that Maduro's in a court where facts and law matter in the United States, they've dropped any mention of the cartel of the Suns. So that seems to be something that might have just been made up by the Department of State to justify this action.
Okay, so is there any pathway you see where the U.S. could stick the landing on this? Do you see any pathway where you think, on the international, we'll use the international stage to begin with, where throughout all of this, even with the capture of Maduro, even in the chapter that we are in right now, that with anybody who right now is criticizing this move, could ultimately see that the U.S. did things the right way?
Well, we didn't do things the right way. Could we stick the landing on this? Well, if the Venezuelans play along and decide that they're cool with everything that's going on, then yeah, the practical matter, this could work as long as we act in the sense of like, hey, we want to help you out and restore your country, which is traditionally what the United States at least said it did, and I think tried to do. But the talk about, like, we want your oil, we want your oil industry back. And that would be key for them, but oil industry execs want to maximize profit. So are they going to really push too much money back to Venezuela to help them? I suspect not. Big oil doesn't traditionally do that. They take what they can get. And if they're being offered whatever you want, essentially, it sounds like, then they're going to take as much as they can get.
So the key you're saying is to make this about helping Venezuela,
yes,
not so much securing U.S. interests.
Well, securing, again, this is a foreign country. So if we operate on the assumption that people get to decide for themselves, so the essence of democracy, of like, you decide what you want to do. They were trapped in a system with Maduro that is horrible, that they elected him initially, but then he was not a valid leader now. So they were stuck in that system. But again, if we want to respect the sovereignty of other nations, which I think at this point, the United States is taking the position that we do not care. We only care about ourselves. As mentioned when I said, like, hey, we're going to invade Greenland potentially. Cuba should be worried. Colombia should be worried. Yeah, that will help us, but it will also hurt us in the long term, because if anybody, again, paid attention in the early part of this century, occupying Afghanistan, occupying Iraq did not go so well, and we left with our tail tucked.
Okay, a couple more questions. So no U.S. service members in this operation were killed, no aircraft or, no equipment
I think some aircraft was hit, but it was still flyable.
Okay. But do you think that the public discussion on this would be much different should, Lord forbid, one of those U.S. service members working in this operation be injured or even worse?
Yes. Well, if one or two had died, there would be some sort of a hubbub, but it wouldn't be a huge uproar. But if you talk about the idea of like, hey, we need to put boots on the ground in Venezuela. Venezuela's got 30,000 people, and it's a mountainous area. So that is a much different situation than Iraq, and Iraq was a horrible experience, as was Afghanistan for similar reasons. So if we have to put, let's say, 10, 20,000 troops in there to quell what is a distinct possibility of a civil disturbances there and rebellious nature, then this will be a very different discussion that should, again, have taken place before action.
Mm-hmm. And I guess my point would be, would the scrutiny, even coming from within the United States, maybe be raised a little bit?
Yes, yes, it would, absolutely.
Something of that nature have happened. And again, no, U.S. service members were injured during this.
It was highly successful. Nothing but praise. Again, I spent my time in the military, very proud of my association there, very proud of the military, the capacity that we have, the most professional, accomplished military in the world, without a doubt.
Yeah, what do you make of the mission just overall? I mean, from everything you've read about this, the operations.
It was amazing, amazing what was able to be accomplished. Hats off to them. It's truly impressive.
When you look at this as somebody who spent so much time in the military, what part of the mission impressed you the most?
The fact that you knew where your target was, Maduro, and that you were able to get in there, grab him with minimal damage. Relatively speaking, the people, the Venezuelans that were killed, it's still a large number, but relatively speaking, it's not huge. And get him out of there and get him here. The whole logistics the training and everything on this is just amazing.
So going forward, I mean, you're looking to secure a seat in the U.S. Senate. How do you think Congress should proceed forward, trying to work with the Trump administration as we get into the next chapters of this story?
Well, again, this story has just started. How it could end great, in which case we still violated any number of laws in accomplishing it, but if it helps the Venezuelans, they'll be grateful, I'm sure. It could be a train wreck, like Afghanistan turned out to be. We don't know how it's going to be yet. So what should Congress do? Again, if we try to follow what the Constitution was designed to be, where Congress protects its power, Congress should be yanking the administration's chain saying, hey, you did this without us. In fact, you told oil companies about it before you told us. That's not right.
So on the congressional side of this, again, you say that the Congress should have been notified. Let's say Congress was notified, but the administration chose to proceed forward anyways. What would that look like in your opinion?
Again, that's just a dare. It's like, well, I'm going to tell you about this, and if you say no, I'm going to do it anyway. Then that's just a dare for Congress to live up to its responsibilities. And Congress has not, again, lived up to its responsibilities for quite a while, unfortunately, because they're fundamentally filled with cowards, and I think partisanship plays a big role in this.
Okay, I want to get off the subject of Venezuela just a little bit. Where else do you think Congress should be pushing back on this administration right now where it's not?
Well, the president has talked about, we're going to run Venezuela. But there's a lot of stuff back at home, like groceries are stupendously expensive. Healthcare for a lot of people is now crazy expensive and probably just going to have to go without. So there's a lot of domestic issues that the president said, no, I've got it, I'm working on it. But does he have the capacity to work on domestic issues while occupying a foreign country and running Venezuela and talking about taking over these other countries? Splitting the attention here is not a good idea. Americans want what they were promised. If it's America first, hey, why are things so expensive for me? Why is healthcare unaffordable? Fix what's broken here. Let's not go hunting for other places.
So you think this just takes up too much attention?
Yes.
And ultimately leads to less attention being on these domestic issues that people want worked on. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Congress could be up against the federal government, the entire federal government could be up against a second government shutdown here soon. One of the key fights that's been going on in Congress is trying to secure a deal on health care. How do you think Congress should move forward ultimately to secure a deal and avoid a shutdown?
Well, people need to be able to afford health care fundamentally, I think. So the Affordable Care Act, as it stands right now, it was a good short-term solution. It is not a viable long-term solution. So we should be looking at what can we replace it with. But until we have this is what the good replacement is that makes things more affordable and accessible for everybody, then we need to put the Band-Aid on the system we have now. So I'm a supporter for extending the ACA subsidies for people, but also, more importantly, thinking about the future and saying, this isn't sustainable, let's change it, make it better.
Yeah, and how do you think the government should go about that? Because you could extend them, but if nothing's done, then we're going to be up against the same exact issue here in 3 years. Yeah, I think it's a 3-year extension, right, that they're looking at right now? Yeah,
which, again, it doesn't need to be that long, but there needs to be what's the next step that can be phased in before it expires with this Band-Aid for extending it. One of the things that I propose is a buy-in for Medicare, where the government already operates Medicare, and it operates it quite well. It's affordable, and it provides the seniors what they need. If we offer it as a buy-in to compete directly with for-profit institutions, insurance companies, then we can have individuals rather than throwing money to for-profit companies, we can have individuals pay for what they can afford with this buy-in. So you still have some skin in the game in the sense that you're into it, you have to pay for it, but it's going to be subsidized directly by the government.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is there any other legislation that you're eyeing right now at the federal level, any new issues that have emerged since we spoke to you last that you'd like to, if you were to secure a seat in Senate, you would want to tackle?
New issues? Well, it's the same old issue. I've said it before. We need a robust antitrust enforcement. We have corporations monopolizing things, big ag, big tech, anything with big in front of it that you've heard before, it's too big. It needs to be broken apart. And the Justice Department has been asleep at the wheel for far too long. Somebody needs to poke them with a stick until they do their job and enforce the rules that we have.
And when you say that, because obviously just the fact that a company is super big is not a problem in itself, but where do you see the problems arising once companies get to this size and this influence?
Well, if you consolidate, the whole idea is competition. That's what the free market system is, competition. And the problem with our economy is that competition is reduced when you have big meat. The big meat companies control, I think it's 80% of the meat industry in the United States, 4 companies. And so there's price fixing, and there's cases about this recently. So there's price fixing and all sorts of issues where they screw over ranchers and cattle producers on the front end, and then they screw over consumers on the back end with higher prices. So low prices on the front end, higher prices on the back end. The lack of competition is what enables that. And that's the same problem in our political system, the lack of competition.
And I know the Trump administration has actually ordered an investigation into the big meat packing companies. What do you hope to see come of that investigation?
Well, I'd like to see some action where 4 companies owning 80% of the market, and they work together to price fix. So we need some action to bust it up, to aggressively enforce the rules that we already have.
Right now, what do you make of Trump's overall strategy on foreign trade?
I'm not a fan of tariffs, as you know. I think the better solution would have been if the goal is to get U.S. manufacturers back into the United States as opposed to whatever, China or wherever they're manufacturing things for the cheap labor, the better approach that would not have hurt the farmers would be to say, hey, American company, you're going to pay pick a number, 5% or 10% penalty tax for producing things overseas. But if you produce it here, it doesn't apply. And then it's geared directly toward those companies and incentivizes them directly without harming our trade with, for example, China, that now doesn't really buy as much of our agricultural products.
Yeah, and China's that deal that we've been watching a lot. Obviously, we have a lot of soybean farmers here in the state of South Dakota. And if you look at the purchase agreements, this year it's about half the usual amount that they would purchase going forward. I've been told it's basically a baseline of what China would purchase. So should you secure a seat in Senate, what would be your message to the president coming from an ag state like South Dakota on that trade deal with China?
Well, my big concern is that China has quite probably shifted its attention away from the United States as a reliable source and to Latin America. I know they're investing a huge amount of money building out ports in South America that when you spend that much money, you're expecting a return on your investment. And so they've shifted a lot of attention to the South. So can we restore that? I don't know if it's going to be possible given what they're trying to do down there. But fundamentally, the tariffs are the problem. The tariffs just like, oh, you're going to do that to me, I'm going to do it back to you. And they're geared as a back and forth, like bickering siblings. So if we can get the tariffs, at least reduced, if not eliminated on a lot of things, in a favor, ideally, as I said, with a tax plan, then it would go a long ways to restoring the oh, you're not doing anything to me, so sure, I'll buy your soybeans or your corn or your pork or whatever.
Okay, final question. I want to touch on this topic. We saw that joint press conference recently between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, really hinting at the idea that a peace deal could be getting at least a lot closer than it's ever been before. What do you make of the entire situation over there?
The war? Well, the war is bad. So Russia is an aggressor. I'm not a fan of Russia in any way, shape, or form. The situation there, I think, just by way of background here, I'm aware that back in, I think it was 2019, there was talk, reporting that Russia and the United States had talked about, hey, U.S., you can have some more free reign in Venezuela if you give us some free reign in Ukraine. I'm concerned that that might be a deal, back-channel deal, that has taken place, in which case, again, this is not a good idea for the position of the United States in the world or the world in general. But to the extent that you can achieve peace in Ukraine, if the Ukrainians are willing to go along with it, then, if that's their choice, yes, absolutely. Let's put all attention to that and try to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like from the discussions that they had that they were getting really close, but there were some of those sticky issues, presumably over some of those land disputes and what to do with some of that land at this point that's really, hotly contested over there.
Well, again, from the standpoint of international law, Russia has invaded and seized territory. That's a blatant violation. Putin is a war criminal, no question. So if Ukraine decides that it's in their best interest to surrender that is their decision. But if the United States is trying to strong-arm them into, like, just give up a little bit, I'll just give up a little bit here, would we do the same thing if somebody said, just give part of Alaska, just a little bit of Alaska to Russia? And I'm going to say nobody would accept that. So we need to be careful what we're trying to do here, because everybody in the world is watching what is happening here and going, well, if they can do that in Venezuela, and if that's what they're willing to do with Ukraine, then this is an entirely different world that is, I'm going to say, distinctly more dangerous, because we're reverting to a 19th century might makes right world, which is going to harm everybody.
And important distinction that you made there. Yes, this was Ukrainian land that the Russian forces moved in on.
Yes.
That now is being contested over what should we do with it going forward. Really appreciate you coming on, Brian, as always. Brian Bengs, he is running for Senate to be a senator for the state of South Dakota, running as the independent candidate. Anyways, Brian, we appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and that will do it for your Political Pulse.